Welcome to Total Design Live. It's a podcast where real tabletop game designers, with a surprise set of design constraints, design a game right before your very ears. It's game design without a net, and it starts now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Season 2 of Total Design Live. I'm David Abelson.
And I'm Rosco Schock. Thanks for joining us. This episode, we are welcoming game designer Greg Loring-Albright. Hey, Greg, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me on.
It's great to have you here, and thanks for agreeing to participate with the Seasons Challenge.
Of course.
For those who may not have met you before or know about you in the game design industry, could you just tell us a brief background, a little bit about game design, and maybe what you've been up to lately?
Sure. So the thing that you probably know me for, if you do know me, is either Ahoy from Leader Games in 2022. I designed that game, developed by Nick Brockman and the team at Leader. That game, Leader is wonderful and incredible, and I was so honored to have them put out my game. So that sort of put me on the map. And then I also co-designed the third edition of Block by Block, the Insurrection game, with my good friend T.L. Simons. So that's more of a niche project. But I also, if people know about Block by Block, they like to talk about Block by Block. So my name comes up in that conversation as well.
Awesome. How did you kind of get into game design? Can you just give us like a couple sentences about that?
Yeah, totally. I was hanging out in Chicago and I liked playing games, and a friend of a friend was like, my friend Andy makes games. You should hang out with him. So I went to hang out with Andy and I emailed him. I was like, Andy, do you want to get coffee? And he was like, no, that's boring. Let's scout the tunnels underneath downtown Chicago for a live action game I'm working on. I was like, I like this guy. And that's Andy Patton, who co-designed Dead Last, the party game that blew up a few years ago. So Andy was the one who sort of showed me that like people make games and had me read lots of cool books and play lots of cool games and sort of started me on the path.
That is really cool.
It was great.
I think very different than a lot of other people's stories. Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
I don't think I've ever gone underground.
Oh, it's rad. Chicago is a very cool downtown.
I mean, does the subway count in New York City?
Yeah, subways are cool. You could make some cool games about subways.
Before we dive into the episode, let's just go over the ground rules. You're going to be given 2 constraints. You'll be asked to design as much of a game as you can in 45 minutes. One of the constraints will be fairly specific. It's intended to give you a starting anchor point. And the other constraint will be fairly vague. It's intended to give you a direction to travel in, but not to confine you. They could be related to theme or mechanics or components or game category or even player experience. Anything not specified is open to your interpretation, and you can take that and run with it. Make sense?
Awesome. Sounds good.
Cool. All right, so we're mostly interested in your thought process. This is not about, making spreadsheets. It's more about the stream of consciousness, the creative approach. Our goal is purely to help the audience better understand your creative process. So once we give you the constraints, we're gonna have a little conversation here about some general questions that'll help you get started. But then once you've got your train on the tracks, we're gonna step aside and kind of watch.
Awesome. I will do my best to keep speaking as I work. I'm sure you all have had this experience. If it's hard to keep talking while you're doing something, but I'll do my best.
It is definitely a new experience for many, so I'm sure you'll do great.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here are your constraints, and it's going to give you both of them, and then we'll go through some prompts. This season, again, we're going to have a theme and component pair. So the theme is topical. So it's something that's going to be coming up this summer. The Olympics. So Olympics is the theme. And for components, we're going to go with polyhedral dice. So nerd dice, your D6, your D12, your D20s, and all that kind of stuff. And we want you to use at least 4 or more types. You can use as many of them as you want. You can also obviously add other things, but we want there to be some variety in how you use these different sided dice for your design. Let's get into a couple of things. What's the first thing that this theme makes you think of?
Oh, I mean, for just right off the dome, kind of boring. I'm not a sports guy. I don't love watching the Olympics. So this is going to be a challenge, which is exciting. Yeah, and we're sort of hitting 2 for 2 here. I played one D&D campaign, and it was fine. I much prefer other kinds of RPGs to the heavy statistical simulation-ness of D&D. So you're gonna be pushing my boundaries here with this. It'll be a good time.
Well, suffice it to say, just because it's about the Olympics doesn't mean it has to be about sports.
Oh yeah, I'm already thinking of wacky ways to go at the Olympics. Don't worry.
So for this theme, does that kind of push you towards a specific weight or audience? Do you have any thoughts about that? Does it seem like you would want to go heavier or lighter, or you're not sure yet?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of, to me, the obvious, and I say obvious, I'm not as a pejorative, right? If other people on this season have said this thing, I'm not trying to come at them, right? Just when I say obvious, I mean, the first thing that springs to my mind. the obvious thing to go for Olympics, right, is sort of like this is a mass market game, right? The Olympics are a mass culture phenomenon. Everybody knows what they are. Everybody can understand the sort of like stakes of the competition. And so light as possible, I think is the go-to. I don't know if I'm going to go there, but I think that's the go-to.
Well, I mean, your first thoughts are always just a starting point, right?
Yes, of course.
I mean, that's the thing that we've seen is that people have never yet ended where they started. So
awesome.
One last question. Is there any kind of like type of game that you think might lend it well for these kind of this kind of theme?
Yeah, the first thing I think of is sort of like a multi-round betting kind of game, right? So like I think Challengers blew up a while ago. I played a really good John Perry who did Airland and Sea and Spots and other stuff. He was testing a game at the last PAX Unplugged. It was like a horse racing betting game where you play, but what these games have in common is you play multiple rounds, right? So you do race 1 and you bet and you get your rewards, and you race 2 and you bet. And so this sort of like multiple events, right, kind of characterizes the Olympics. And that's the first thing that I think about structurally. Again, I don't know if I'm going to take my design there when we start brainstorming, but if you had to tell me if this was a 45-second and not a 45-minute process, that's what I would go with.
Let's talk dice for a minute.
Yeah.
So you've got a component that comes, in multiple different varieties, and you mentioned D&D, but certainly polyhedral dice have been used for all sorts of reasons in all sorts of games.
For sure.
Can you think of any examples of games that use polyhedral dice that would help you to make some comparisons besides D&D?
Yeah, what are some good non-D6 dice games? I know Root famously uses a D12 for combat. I think the X-Wing Miniatures game, those are 8-sided dice. They're not D8s. They're like custom symbol dice. Is it Kemet, one of the area control games that does a little they're like Egyptian games, so they're pyramids for the D4s. I've not played it. I've just heard people talk about it. But yeah, honestly, the place I most often see non D6 dice that are not custom printed dice is role playing games. So that's going to be fun to think about.
Yeah, and let me just jump in with a follow up on that.
For sure.
A couple of years ago on the Gen Cant contest, they had it was I think partially with Button Shy. They had like a roll and write challenge, and you had to basically use your only things you could have was a D4, a D6, a D8, a 10, a 12, and a 20.
Fun.
And so there was a lot of things there, and like I think the majority of them were nothing like any kind of D&D or a dungeon crawler. So if you know Clarence Simpson, he's one of the co-designers of the Wolves.
Oh, yeah,
he has a
great.
game out from one of the from a different publisher, and I forget who the publisher is, so apologies. But it's called Merchants of Magic, and it uses all the different polyhedral dice, and it was based on his initial design for that contest.
Oh, so, very cool. That's from Rock Manor. They're local.
Yeah, there you go. That's what it is. I couldn't remember which one it was, but yeah, that one was his entry into that contest, and then it got rethemed and stuff. But it uses like one of each of the polyhedral dice, and has some of that targeting of like each dice has its own max, min, average, and stuff like that to find different pieces. So just throwing that in there as a comparison that's not RPG. For sure.
While we're at it, my entry into that contest was a teaching game where you were a student studying all the different subjects, and each die represented a different subject.
Oh, that's fun.
So it was like a a la Gone Clever, where you roll all the dice and then choose one, and then you had.
I'm going to be good at math this round. I'm going to be good at social. Very cool.
Yeah, and then the D20 was a tutor, and I didn't actually enter that contest because Rosco played it and he said it was bad. So.
You can enter bad things in the contest. No one says you can't.
That's true. Actually, I don't know if Rosco did play it.
Right, yeah, that's not true. I've never played it.
He just default said it was bad without having played it.
I'll bring it to the next time I see you. Does this component suggest a specific sort of decision tree or arc?
I mean, it suggests randomness. I'm like terrified by the swinginess of a D20. 1 to 20 is a wild range, and I'm going to do my best not to like cheat out on that by being like, well, 1 to 5 is this, and 6 to 10, you know what I mean, making it into a D4. But yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of randomness in this game.
That might be okay. Have you seen the Olympics?
Oh yeah, that's not pejorative. I love randomness. And actually something I learned, speaking of my design background, designing with T.L. Simons, Block by Block is a dice assignment game, right? It's like you sort of like use your dice to take actions, and the more dice you roll, the less random it is over the course of the entire game, right? So if we roll dice, let's roll a ton of dice.
And then it's more fun too because you got a whole handful.
Right, absolutely.
Okay, so do you feel like this is a good place for you to get started? Because I've seen some gears move. I think you're ready to go. So if you're good, best of luck. Your 45 minutes begins now.
Okay, so I feel like I've been starting in kind of a negative space of saying like, I don't want to do this and I don't want to do that. And that's fine, right? It's good to know what you're reacting against and what you want to like avoid. But I'm going to try and shift to the positive space via a brainstorming exercise. I teach in a game design program. And so I have my students do a lot of brainstorming. And so I'm trying to think about what brainstorming exercise should I use around the Olympics. And I think the one I'm going to use is I'm going to just try and brainstorm and just spit out as many verbs as I can related to the Olympics, because games are all about verb. And I'm going to type while I do this, so apologies if you hear some clicking and clacking. So I've got Olympics, which is a noun. And what do you do at or around or to or about or among the Olympics? You compete, you try out, you train, you spectate, you bet on, but maybe that's illegal. So you're also trying to like sneak or avoid. If you're a country, you're like trying to, what's a good verb for like, you're trying to get the Olympics to come to you. You want to like entice the Olympics. You're going to like prepare your city. So you're going to like demolish and renovate. And I feel like people are always building new subway lines when the Olympics come to their city. So let's have build, parentheses, trains, because I love trains. And then maybe specifically, I know you said Summer Olympics was the inspiration, but I could include Winter Olympics, but I'll start with summer. What are the Summer Olympic sports? Fencing, that's like the one I cared about as a kid. I went to the Olympic Training Center as a kid and like posed with the fencing statue. Basketball, well, that's not a verb. What do you do in basketball? You shoot, you dribble. I don't actually know very many Olympic sports, so I'm probably not going to go that specific. So let's go back. I'm going to take like 10 more seconds on verbs, and then I'll zoom out. What are some more Olympic verbs? You compete, you try, you train, you spectate, you bet on, you entice. You celebrate when you win. You award medals or are awarded medals. And I think that's my time for myself, not for the whole thing. So, okay, so from these verbs, now, what do I like? What thinking, sort of trying to take the Olympics out of the picture now in my brain. What do I want the players to do in this game? Do I want them to compete? Probably. Do I want them to try out or train? Not really. That feels low stakes. I don't really want to make one of these like multi-round betting games where it's like I'm trying to get on the team and then the team's trying to win the championships and then they go to the Olympics. So I'm going to skip those. Spectate. Okay, so that's my time on the verbs. Now I'm going to think about, from this list of verbs, what do I want the players to do, like sort of absent the theme, or not absent the theme, but in terms of gameplay. So I've got compete. Do I want them to compete? Yes. I don't want to make a co-op game right now. Try out, train. I don't think I want this sort of like multi-round building up, like training for the team, going to the nationals, going to the Olympics. I'm not as into that. Spectate and bet on and avoid. Yeah, I like that whole cluster of like watching things happen and getting excited. That feels like an unorthodox take on Olympics, so I'll leave spectate in there. Entice. Does this want to be a game about like cities? Maybe. David, I see your hand. Yeah, so my thought was like, if you're spectating, what adds stakes to spectating? Well, it's you're betting on the games, and then betting on the Olympics is, I think, illegal, although there's like terrible sports betting taking over everything now. So it's like, my thought was, if you're betting, you're probably trying to sneak around and avoid like the heat from the cops or whatever. Not trying to avoid the Olympics. That would be, I mean, maybe. I was just talking to somebody who was like, oh yeah, maybe I'll go to Paris. And then they're like, well, not this summer. I'm not going to go to Paris because the Olympics are there. Okay, so we got compete, spectate. Do we want to entice? Do we want to keep the like bringing the Olympics to your city? Maybe not, but entice is a good word, so let's keep it in. Entice, demolish, renovate, build. No, I don't want to do a city builder, so I'm going to skip those. Fence, shoot, dribble. No, again, I don't care about the sports. I think this is going to be a game about Olympics sort of broadly and not about individual sports, so I'm going to skip those. Celebrate and award. Yes, I think that's fun, having like the moment where the athletes are like on the stand with their gold medal. Like, yeah. Cool. Okay, so I've got some verbs that I want players to do in this game. I want them to compete. I want them to spectate. I want them to entice. I want them to award. I want them to celebrate. And I'm keeping it loose as to whether those are like the player character is doing that or the actual player is doing that. TBD. Okay, so now I have these verbs, and so I'm like, what is the game gonna be? And so I'll use another exercise that I have my students do to sort of like rapid pitch. And we use this formula of like, in this game, you are blank, trying to blank in order to blank, right? So in this game, in Mario, you are Mario, trying to run and jump in order to save the princess. So in Olympics game, Untitled Olympics Game 1, you are a city trying to get the Olympics to come to your town, trying to change your cityscape in order to get the Olympics to come to your town. I know I said I was avoiding the city builder, but maybe I'm not. Okay, in this game, you are an Olympic spectator trying to watch the best games in order to have a great trip. We're in sort of like a let's go to Japan exclamation point kind of mode. In this game, you are an athlete trying to prevent your rival from winning. I don't want you to be an athlete trying to win. That's boring. In this game, you are, I really want to get the entice in here. In this game, I mean, it's got to be the cities. In this game, okay, this is like from the Olympic Village, right? Are like the Olympians, these athletes who are like, in the prime of their lives, at their peak physical fitness. They compete, and then they go back to the dorms, and they all have sex with each other. And then there are all these stories about like, oh, they made these like cardboard beds to keep them from doing that. And then someone said that was an urban legend. So maybe the entice is like you're trying to get someone on a certain team to sleep with you. We can soften that to like date you, right? Because games about sex don't sell. In this game, you are an Olympic athlete trying to impress your crush in order to go on a date with them in the Olympic Village. That's maybe my favorite one so far. Let me do like two more. In this game, you are the medal. Maybe you're the actual physical medal. In this game, you are an Olympic medal trying to travel back to the country in which you were mined in order to fulfill a mystic goal of yourself as an inanimate object. I thought I was going to do two more, although the last two I did were my favorites. So maybe that means this next one's going to be the best one yet. In this game, you are the committee of a sport trying to get your sport recognized to be in the Olympics. I like that one too. I just watched Waiting for Guffman, the Christopher Guest documentary. I feel like this has big Christopher Guest energy of like this. What's the most absurd sport that you can be? Okay, so pickleball, says David in the chat. Yeah, the Pickleball Olympic Committee. Okay, so of those, we've got mystic medals trying to get back to their home countries, and so they're going to try and like use their magical auras to influence the athletes so that, they were mined in Kyrgyzstan. And even though the Kyrgyz team is not going to win, they're going to make the Kyrgyzstan team win so they can go home. It's funny. It's got magic. Maybe. We've got dating game. Still my favorite. You're an Olympic athlete. You have a crush. You're trying to impress them. And maybe it's like, you don't impress them by doing the best at the sport, because that's blasé, right? You're all Olympians. You all know you can do the best at the sport every day. You have to do something weird to impress them.
Obscure sports trying to get into the Olympics. I know there's been a lot of stuff anecdotally also. You didn't mention this, but like people trying to get like esports, like League of Legends or some stuff like that.
Oh, wild.
Into
I did not even know that.
Olympics as well. So the last thing was weird oddball sports in.
Yes, right. The sort of like Christopher Guest mockumentary style. I like that. I want it to be silly. I don't want to be mean, right? I keep coming back to this Christopher Guest touchstone because I just watched one, like I said, and I'd like they get this really fine line of like they are mean to the people a little bit, but they also love them, right? And so I don't want to like have a game that's like unkind to people who do weird sports, because weird sports are awesome. But I like that one. There's a lot of potential for like each player for a little bit of asymmetry. Each player can like be a different committee, and they're trying to get their sport to the top. Maybe there's only one slot. So I've got three. I don't love the Mystic Medals. It's funny, but it's like funny at a pitch level. I don't think it'd be funny to play. Dating is good. If I had to choose right now, I'd go to dating, but also weird sports is good. I don't know. Do you guys have thoughts? Do you have questions you wanna throw in there? I feel like I'm at a pause moment, but I can also just plow through.
I feel like you have your process so far has introduced so many possibilities.
Yes, that's how I roll.
That you, like Doctor Who, now have to choose where to go.
All right, you're not going to help me. Is what you're saying. I've made my bed. I've got to lie in it. All right.
I like, for my opinion's sake, I like the idea of the two of the things you mentioned, but I don't know.
You're not going to tell me which two. Awesome. No, that's more fun. It's more fun. Don't tell me which two.
I'll tell you later.
Okay, great. Tell me at the end. All right, I'm gonna keep going then. I think I'm gonna go with dating as my main one. But I also think like the nice thing is, and I try not to like live my life with regrets or like backstop things too much, right? But the nice thing about this is, if the dating one falls apart for whatever reason, the procedurality of this I think can easily apply to both, right? There's a way to pivot from, oh, I'm trying to get this other person to go on a date with me, and turn that into, I'm trying to get the Olympic Committee to like my sport. Okay, so in this game, you're an Olympic athlete trying to impress your crush in order to go on a date with them. Cool. Our key verb here is entice. We also have compete. We also have spectate, because then you can watch, right? If like I'm on the fencing team trying to impress a swimmer, they can watch me play, and that's part of what I'm going to do. All right, I like this. So now the next thing I need to think about is how I'm going to use those dice. When I design, usually I'm not usually so component locked, right? Like this is part of the exercise, part of the allure. But as I was preparing for this, I was like, what are people going to get out of this? And so I was like, let me tell them about what I do. One of my favorite episodes of your season 1 was Ashwin's episode, because he was just, I learned so much about how he designs. I was like, that's an aspiration for me. I'm not going to be as good or as funny as him. But I want you to get a sense of like what I do when I design a game. And what I usually do is I start writing the rules right out the gate, because writing rules is a way to learn what a game is going to be. But first, I think I need to solve this dice problem, and then I can start writing some rules. So you need to use at least 4 of the standard polyhedral dice. And they don't need to be everything. Like I liked in your first season, a lot of the people doing the 100 card challenge, not many of them, but like you mentioned Power Grid in your sample game. Like it doesn't have to be built around those dice. The pitch doesn't have to be, it's a game of polyhedral dice about the Olympics, right? So maybe I'll use them tangentially to give myself a little bit of an easier path here, because I'm thinking all these things about these dice and I'm not loving any of them. And I'll tell you what they are right now, because that's part of the exercise, right? So I'm thinking like, okay, so I have to secretly roll and assign the dice to challenges. Are those challenges winning the contest? Are those challenges doing something weird? And then I have this array of dice outcomes that I have to assign to things to impress my crush. But it's like, how do I know my crush is there? Maybe one of them is like, get them to come to the event. Maybe one of them is like, I don't even know what I would do. I'm imagining a handful of dice, and you roll them behind a screen maybe, and then you put them on something, and it's just not compelling me. So I think I'm gonna pivot to a different core mechanic. I'm gonna try and lock the core mechanic, or not lock, but at least like get a pitchable version of, which is something I do usually in my designs. I think, what is the thing that we're gonna do regularly, often, every turn, every round? And so I'm imagining like a map. Like this is like a moving around game of not quite like an area control, but like there's like a map of the Olympic Village, and there's different stadiums, and you move yourself, right? And you have to go to your competitions. And then there are also these other pieces. Maybe they're not controlled by players. Maybe they are, right? Maybe like I have a suite of 3 characters, and everyone does. And I'm trying to I need to ensure that the person I have a crush on is in the stands when I do my thing. I'm thinking this is a big part of the game, right? So I need to be able to manipulate or encourage the player who controls that piece, or maybe it's the game system that controls that piece, TBD, to go where I want it to go. And that represents my crush watching me do the thing, and then I have to do the thing while they're there watching. So I like that. I don't know how we're going to do it, but I think that's the center of this game, is like, okay, you're manipulating these pawns. I'm imagining like a node point-to-point map, almost like Scotland Yard, of like a big city where the Olympics are happening. And it's like, oh shoot, soccer is on the outskirts by the airport, and I'm going to be playing in fencing over here at 3:00. So there's some sort of time, some sort of distance of travel. Maybe that's one of the ways where the dice come in. Maybe you're using the dice to travel oh, is this gonna be a roll and move game? Am I making a roll and move game? All right, maybe. You're using the dice to travel so that you have this like tension, right? The dice are great at tension. Dice are great at you shake it in your hand and you don't know what's going to happen, and then boom, you find out, and that moment before you find out is great. So maybe that's like the taxis of like, oh, traveling in cities when the Olympics are on is terrible. So okay, cool. So you're going to roll your dice and you'll use them to move your pawn. I'm going to start writing these things down. Roll dice, move your pawn, because you have to get to your scheduled events. Sorry, I just touched my microphone a little bit there. And move other pawns. Players, ? Game, ? TBD. My rules are littered when I write them, even through many drafts, littered with TBD and big capitalized words with big question marks at the end, as I slowly fill in the gaps. So when I say I write rules early, I don't want people to think like the game springs fully formed out of my head. I write a document that has the form of rules and has a ton of blanks. And then as I design, the blanks fill themselves in. Okay, so why are they dice? Well, they're dice for traveling because it's roll and move. You can move X spaces. But you need to use the dice for other things. Otherwise, there's no tension. Otherwise, I always just grab my D20 and assign that to my movement. And a question I have to resolve here is, do I assign before or after movement? But I'll solve that later. I'll write that down to solve later. Dice, assign, and by movement, I mean rolling. Before or after rolling? ? While I think about this, I'll talk a little bit more about my design process. I, as many people on this show, don't usually design this fast or this intensely. I usually have a couple designs kind of on the back burner in my mind. Actually, I have a folder in my Google Drive where I organize all my stuff called the back burner. And that's games that I'm not working on right now, but that I could be. And I are probably in my head enough that I could pull them out and start working on them if I needed to. And I love that back burner. My game that is coming out soon that I'll talk about at the end was a back burner game for a long time, and I just kept putting it on the table because I liked it, and I was like, I should be working on this other game, but let me play test this game. And it got so much development that I just had to pitch it. So I go slow. I think about things while I'm in the shower, before I fall asleep, or when I'm driving. David, what's up?
Did you call that? Is that game called the back burner?
No. That game's called Keep the Faith. I love cooking. I'm working on a sort of experimental cooking game. That's not called the back burner, but maybe it should be. Titles. No, it's fine. It's good. I'm so bad at titles. I told my students the other day, I was having them turn in games, and I was like, you need to have a title on your game. You cannot turn me in a game called Untitled Game, because everyone will turn in Untitled Game and I'll lose my mind during grading. And then I showed them a sell sheet I had submitted for a game that hasn't been signed yet and probably never will be. And the working title is Space Fight. I was like, if I can put Space Fight on a piece of paper, I'm going to show to a publisher. You can call your game something when you turn it into me to grade it. So I mentioned Space Fight as evidence that I'm terrible at titles. Okay, so what was I talking about? Oh yeah, I was sharing, like, that's how I design. I keep things cooking kind of low and slow, going in the background. I talk to myself, and again, I always have these evolving rules docs up so that when I come up with something, I don't lose it. I usually put it on paper. If I'm out and about, I commute on the bus a lot, so I'll write notes in my design journal on the bus. But then as soon as I get to a computer, I'll pop it in the rules doc, and I'll either version it if it's a change, or I'll just be filling in those blank question marks. And that's how my games sort of get built, from that kind of 0 to 1 stage where this game is now. All right, but I talked enough. I let the dice idea kind of roll around in the back of my head a little bit. So what do you do with the dice?
Excellent.
I think maybe
nice
they're
puns, by the way. That was very good.
Oh yeah, roll around. I didn't even. Man, I'm true dad joke style. Yeah. Non-gender dad joke. Anyone can make dad jokes. Right. So I think I'm going to lock the dice to certain actions. So like you have to use your 20 and your 12 and maybe your 10. Maybe your 10's a flex. You have to use let's start like this. You have to use your 20 and your 12 and your 10 for your athletic actions. and you have to use your 4 or your 6 or your 8 for your movement actions. So that's, and again, when I say these things, I'm saying like D8, D12, D10, D6, right? Okay, so that's cool. So at the start of the round, you roll a handful of dice. Let's keep them behind a screen. I like secrets. I like the drama, and then you're going to use those dice to do things. Here's a question: in what turn order? I love simultaneous play games like bids, and everyone throws out a card and then you flip them all up face up. That's like one of my favorite moments in any game. So I like this idea of like, we all have this potential behind our screens. We've all rolled our dice, but we haven't assigned them yet. And so maybe one of the things you do with your die is you're going to bid for priority, for turn order. And going last is probably good, right? Because if there's multiple pawns you're moving around and I don't know who has a crush on who and who wants who to be where, like I want to move last so I can see like, okay, my crush has stopped moving. They're at the soccer stadium. I can go there. So you're going to bid to go last. And you can take any of your dice and bid it. And so you grab one die in your fist. That's going to be hard to not flip it over. You put, you have cards. This is inelegant, but we'll fix it at the next pass, which will never happen. You have a card for your 4, your 6, your 8, your 10, your 12, etc. And so you roll your dice. They're sitting behind your screen, and then you pick one of your cards that says which die you're committing for your bid, and you slide it in the middle of the table, and then you flip it. So my card says 20. That means I'm using my D20 to bid for priority. Cool. Okay, so then we do it. We all have locked in, and we reveal what we're doing. How are we going to resolve ties? Who cares? We'll figure it out later. Once we have our priority, we have our turn order, then we start taking turns assigning dice, and we can assign our dice to whatever we want. You could do move across the city with one of your allowable dice. You could do an athletic action with one of your dice. And I guess I feel like we need social actions too, right? Of like, you're not just impressing people with your athletic feats. You are also trying to like charm them. So we've got like 3 categories of actions here. I love action selection games too. It's just such an intuitive way to do things, which can be a weakness, but can also be a strength. So we've got social actions, we've got athletic actions, and we've got travel actions. So every turn within the round, you're going to take a die, and you have 5 left, right? Because you've assigned 1 for bidding, 20, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4. Yep. You have 5 left, so you're going to take 5 actions on your turn. Maybe you're going to take 4 and you get 1 as like a buy. I feel like it would always be the 4 though. So maybe you have some sort of bonus for the 4. Maybe there's an action that likes low numbers. Let's just say use all 5. In early in designs, I feel like it's good to just be like, what's the most obvious answer? Do it. And then maybe flag like it could be something else, right? Because you don't want to overwrite possibilities. So you've got, I'm going to write some of these up because again, that's how I like to work. So you've got your 6 dice. Bid 1 for turn order, parentheses, want to go last. Maybe you don't. Maybe there's a situation where you don't want to go last, but generally in games like this, it's good to go last because you get to see the situation before you act. Must assign certain dice to certain actions. Rosco, what's up?
Hey, so I just wanted to check in. So we're a little over halfway. And
oh no!
It sounds like we have like a core thing. You have a map, you have some dice, and you have some different actions, and some action selection, and some simultaneous choices there. So, that's kind of where we're at right now. I just wanted to kind of give you a time check, and sounds interesting so far. So I'm gonna let you get back at it. Just wanted to give you kind of an update. So there you go.
Good. Thank you. I'm glad it sounds interesting. I feel like I feel like I've talked myself out of it. I think I'm like bored with it a little bit right now. Like I want. When I pitched it, when you guys still had your cameras on because we've been having some technical issues, it made you laugh when I talked about this idea, and I feel like now I'm like so deep in the weeds that I'm losing that like it's funny, and I hope it's not like just like note sort of one trick pony kind of funny, right? It's like it's a game about the Olympics, but it's about dating and sex. Like that's not. I don't want this sort of prurient interest, right? I want this sort of like this notion of these people who are world-class athletes who are the best, literally the best person in the world at a thing, also being bad at something, right? They're like trying to impress this other person. What's up, David?
I think your worry is natural but not necessary, because
Okay, great. You're not bored with it yet?
I'm not bored with it, but I also think that, and maybe you would agree with this, that at this stage of the design process, you're really more about mapping out the path of the game, not necessarily building the story. And that probably frustrates you because it sounds like you're a build the story kind of guy.
Yeah, and I like to make sure that the two are inextricable, right? That the things you are doing as your character are not just arbitrarily assigned to board game mechanics because board game mechanics exist, right? I want you to think about like, oh, how does it feel to ask somebody out on a date? How does it feel to twiddle your thumbs nervously as you wait for them to show up, right? Like that's what I want. And I think the dice, part of why I like this theme for this component constraint is that dice have some of that, right? You can be really good. You could roll a d20, right? You could be like, as the kids say, you could have Riz, right? And then you could roll a 1. And that's funny and that's good. And that's like a real thing that happens to people in the world.
Yes.
So I want to make sure that I'm like not straying away from the sort of like thematic aspect that I'm trying to capture, even as I'm deep in this sort of like mechanical space.
Yeah, I don't think you are.
Okay, good.
When you get to the second and third pass, I bet you'll fix all that.
Yes, exactly. Right. I don't want to build a bad foundation. You know, I had a talk one time with Henry Audubon, who brilliant designer, Parks, Cosmoctopus, all these great stuff. Yeah. And we were talking about like advice for game designers, and you know, everyone always says, "Oh, get a prototype on the table early," and he was like, I actually don't. I do the opposite. And so this is not advice for like first time game designers or even second time game designers, right? Early game designers, get a prototype on the table early. But as you do it more, Henry was saying like it's almost better to wait, because as soon as you start prototyping something, you start to lock it in, and it becomes, you start to be unable to make new decisions because you've made old decisions. So all I'm saying is like, I'm trying to be careful, even in this quick exercise, that I'm not locking myself into stuff just because, right? That I'm actually considering, what do I want this game to be about? What do I want it to say? How do I want it to feel? That if I can build that in from the absolute ground up, the game will be better for it. But I'm glad you're not bored, and I'm glad that it does. You know, I talked myself back into it with the dice. There are structural things about this game, mechanically, that mirror the structural things about the thematic aspect I'm trying to capture. So I just got to keep that in mind. And the image of the best person in the world being bad at something, I think, is a good touchstone for this game. Just because you are the world champion, you know, distance runner, doesn't mean you can get a good taxi across Paris at rush hour during the Olympics, right? You're powerless unless you get out and run, but you're probably too tired to do that. Okay, so what are we trying to figure out? We're trying to figure out how you're going to win, because it's a game. I do appreciate people who are experimenting with non-standard win conditions and no win conditions, but for this game, I think we need to win. But maybe it could be a multiple winner game. So it's like, okay, if you land the date, you win. Do I want it to be like multiple dates? No, that's too. There's like a drama in like straightforward stories. You have one chance. You see this beautiful fencer. You want to take him out to dinner. And if you mess up, you're done for. You don't get a second shot to ask him out. So you have one date. And so if you get your date with your person, you win. And maybe there's like a social aspect. Maybe you have to actually play the date. You have to like, throughout the game, you're putting your dice into your social pool to power something that then checks at the end against a die roll or something. That's a good, you know, Euro sort of tension of like, are you playing to power your engine, or are you playing to get victory points? All right, so social actions fuel a pool that doesn't help now, but helps at the end. Cool. Athletic actions help now. They improve your confidence because you're winning your games or whatever, and you're doing feats of strength and glory on the field of whatever, and that impresses your person if they're in the stands. Impress person, improve confidence. And then your travel actions are just mechanical, going places, getting where you need to be on time. Okay, and so on your turn, you roll your pool of dice, you bid for turn order, you start assigning dice to actions. There are certain dice you're only allowed to assign to certain kinds of actions. and then you do them. And so it's like you can only take an athletic action if you're in the athletic area that is assigned to your character. Maybe that's hard. Maybe it's hard to, like, if I play soccer and there's 5 stadiums on the board, I only have 1 of 5 places I need to go. So maybe some of the athletic actions are actually like spectating as well. I have to assign a die to like pay attention and watch the sport. And if I'm not paying attention when my crush is competing, they see me looking at my phone and are sad. So I'm looping spectating in with athletic actions so that there's a spread across the map. Great. So you assign your dice. Your social actions fuel you up for the date. Your athletic actions help you in the moment. Your travel actions take you from place to place. Everyone can win and everyone can lose, but it's not cooperative. But it's also it's semi-competitive, right? Not semi-cooperative, not the kind of block by block dynamic of we could all lose, but one of us could win. It's we all could win, full stop. And so to that end, I think the crush pawns, the people who are representing the people who are the players have crushes on, are not going to be controlled by players, because I don't want you to have to be mean to people. I don't want you to have to try and figure out, here's what this person's going for, let me stop them, right? That's not in line with this kind of story, right? We're in kind of the rom-com space. So we need like chance and providence and fortuitousness, and so the game system via some sort of bot will control the crush pawns. The default co-op, pandemic style co-op, draw a card, follow the commands. The commands are going to move the pawns around, and you're going to have to follow them and compete where they are or watch them compete. Okay, what else do we need? If I was going to throw this on the table now, we need the board. We have to figure out the like dynamics of the point-to-point map of like how many connections do we want to each point? Where do we want bottlenecks? Where do we want to make it easy to go? Where do we make it hard to go? It feels like it's missing something. I don't know. I'm gonna throw to you guys. I know you're gonna say this is your game, but I'm gonna throw to you anyway.
The best thing to do right now, if you're asking my opinion, is to step back to the beginning and give us the 30-second elevator pitch to sort of bring yourself up to speed on what you've created, and then see if that takes you to the next step.
All right, that's great. Okay, so in this game, you are a world-class Olympic athlete trying to compete, connect, and another C word that means travel, in order to impress your crush and get a date at the Olympic Village. So you're trying to do those things, and maybe this takes us to like, who are the players, right? Like what, maybe you get to define some part of like who you're into, right? Gender, look, vibe. But then there might be a whole lot of bot stuff to run, but maybe not. I don't know. Or maybe it's set. Maybe let's do this. You draft, so you get a hand of cards, and it's like, all right, Steve is a soccer player. He's attracted to men, and he likes a muscly guy, right? Everyone in the Olympic Village is going to be muscly, but you get the idea. You pick from one of these cards to kind of set your goal, right? This is sort of a recipe fulfillment type of mechanic. And then that maybe you get to choose. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe you, throughout the game, you're not locked in on one crush. You are you can crush on anybody. It's the Olympic Village. Everybody's out here looking good. So you can decide as the game goes on. Oh, you know what? Actually, this person, I'm not into her anymore. I think I'm going to try and impress this other guy. So that's fun, and that gives the players chances. The thing we haven't really dealt with yet is what I said at the top, right? Of when you need to roll a ton of dice, and you kind of are. You're rolling 6 dice every turn, but it's probably not going to be a long game, so you're not like. I don't think you're going to average out, right? I don't know enough about probability to understand how the math works, but generally, the more dice you roll, the closer you approach the sort of mean of a given die. A spread for a d20 is huge, so I'm imagining you'd have to roll it a ton, but I might be revealing my statistical ignorance here. Anyway, what I'm getting at is you need to have some way to mitigate your dice luck, because the game isn't going to do it for you. And so maybe that is you get to choose who you want to date as the game goes on. And so you start out by taking actions that are like, oh, well, I'm pivoting myself to be attractive to this person. But then your dice start betraying you, and you're like, shoot, maybe I got to try and get a date with this other person who I didn't think I was into at first. I like that. This is putting a lot of design weight on the bot system, which is tough, right? We're going to have multiple characters with multiple characteristics moving around all on their own. But I think that's okay. That's that's where the fun of the game is. I want the players to not have to worry about running these other characters. I want them to get into the headspace of the character they're playing. Not necessarily embody. This isn't an RPG, but I want them to be able to be funny about their dice roll outcomes and the things they're doing of like, oh, now she's in a taxi. Oh, now they've fallen in the river, right? Maybe there are ways to embarrass yourself. I don't know. I like the idea of someone like jumping out of a taxi into the river, and they're an Olympic swimmer, so of course then they get there faster. Maybe you get bonuses to different kinds of travel depending on what kind of sport you're playing. We are sort of moving towards like an RPG character sheet, which I don't hate. I don't think it's the kind of character sheet where you're going to like write the stats out. I'm imagining more like a tarot-sized card that has certain bonuses listed on it. And so that's what you're drafting at the beginning of the game.
So something that develops more like the role player of the game without all the ongoing die actions.
Yeah, right. And you're not you, the player, are not taking agency to alter this person. They just sort of exist as this kind of stat bank, and you then decide how to take advantage of that. Cool. So then I feel like there's got to be there's like a mood shift, right? Because there's this kind of comedic antic running around trying to be on the field. I imagine someone like trying to score a goal in the soccer game so that they can impress their date, but then they let their team down because they weren't, playing support or whatever. But then we pivot to this more like down sort of like social moment of like the middle school, you pass the note to the friend, like, will you go out with me? Check yes or no, don't write maybe and check that, right? Like we need this other mood to be included in this game. And so maybe that's like the end phase where it's like after you do all this wild antic stuff, then you get this kind of like quieter moment. But that also feels anticlimactic. Maybe it's like every round you pivot between these sort of like, we're running around the city, it's daytime, we're falling in the river, it's so silly. And then you have these like heartfelt moments of like, I really want to talk to him. Yeah, I like that. I like an alternation of okay, so and maybe that's you're reserving some of your dice. Maybe that's where the social actions go. They go in the nighttime phase. So you've got daytime where you're moving around, competing, and you've got nighttime where you're like trying to find this person and figure out where they live and who their friends are and how you can talk to them and how you can be the kind of person who they want to be with. Okay. Cool. Yes, Rosco.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in here. So got about 5 minutes left. And so the one thing that I maybe you could talk on, just tease out a little bit. You were talking a lot about like, some of these athletic actions and going places and just generally being supportive and trying to get someone's attention that way. But earlier on, you mentioned that like, well, yeah, there's going to be 40,000 people there though, right? And like, they're going to be focused on their stuff. And like, I know you're kind of like tweaking here and starting talking about some of these nighttime actions. So it'd be really interesting to hear, at least you brainstorm a little bit about like how you might get noticed, right? Like you said, there's like everyone here is hot and young and successful and whatever. Like, how do you get get someone's eye? Like, and you say some of these funny moments, that was cool, jumping in the water or whatever. Like, is everyone playing charades back at the village? I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying that's
yeah.
But like, is there?
No, I like this.
Is there some elaboration there that you could at least brainstorm a little bit about? Like, how might you, especially with the die roll, like, hey, I'm going to tell a joke, but I rolled a 1, and so like everyone's just like,
it was a bad joke.
So it's like the bump bump sound, right? And it's like awkward crash and burn. So yeah, if you could just tease out that in the next 5 minutes as you're kind of wrapping up, that would be great.
For sure. Yeah, I like how you connected the like jumping in the river moment of like that's important for this game, right? You need that sort of like mix and match of getting around plus sport plus love. And so what you said made me think of like, okay, so maybe there's some sort of like track of notoriety, or maybe it's a currency you gain with little chips or whatever. But it's like, okay, I did jump in the river to try and get to the stadium on time and swim. But now everyone's now talking about, oh, did you hear about the swimmer who jumped in the river? And so that track is sort of like constantly going in the background as you are like becoming the subject of gossip in the Olympic Village. And to some extent, maybe for some of the crushes, that's good. Maybe they want someone who's like well known and well talked about. And for some of them, that's bad, right? Maybe they want someone who's like low key and not a showboat. And so this is a thing you have to manage that is like an outcome of your actions. Is this notoriety. And then once we get into that kind of stuff of like a track or a currency, there could be a secondary one too, right? Of like, how are you playing, right? Are you playing as a team player? Are you playing as an individualist? Are you playing to win? Are you playing to support? That feels like the same dynamic. So maybe that's not it. But once you get one sort of track of like your actions, what I like about this, I think, is all your actions do the thing you want them to do to a certain degree or not. And then they also have a knock-on effect of, well, I needed to jump in the river and now everyone's talking about me. Is that positive or negative? Maybe I have to take a social action to find out. I like what you said, Rosco, about like rolling the die to tell a joke. Right now, how I have the game structured, you would never actually do that, right? You roll all your dice and then you say, okay, well, I rolled a 1. I'm not going to assign that to my joke because I want my joke to land. But that's a really good moment of like, I'm going to tell a joke. I need to roll a die because that's how jokes work. You never know if they're going to land. So I would want to tweak something about this game to make it like there are actions you take by assigning a set die, a die you have rolled, and there are actions you take that you have to roll for. That feels too complicated. I like the sort of cleanliness of the core system right now. That's probably something I would work on in development on this game. What else do I want to get in here? What else do I want to tell you about my process? Like, I feel like I'm just sort of tweaking individual mechanics right now, which is fine, but not that enlightening. When I get to the place like this, usually what I would do is like go for a walk, or like one of my favorite things to do is to, if I'm driving alone or my children are asleep enough that I can speak, I'll turn on a voice recorder and I'll record some thoughts of talking about a thing. So this is actually a lot like that, what I'm doing right now. But then I'll usually get to listen back to those and kind of stew on them a little bit. So let me just I'm going to rapidly stew. Ready? Okay, so what if there are actions you can take that you have to spend some of this currency? Maybe it's this notoriety currency we're talking about. Maybe it's a different kind of currency. And that lets you re-roll a die. Or if you take this action, you have to spend one of these and re-roll the die. I don't know. It's like, what is different, and is it worth it being different enough to alter the core system, right? The core system is great. It's clean. You roll, you bid, you assign dice. I don't want all these, but unless you're telling a joke, then you have to roll the die and not assign it. So maybe this is just something I have to leave on the cutting room floor of like, I like Roscoe's idea about roll a die to tell a joke, but it's not going to work in this framework. David, what's up?
I think this is something you're going to have to leave on the cutting room floor because you
am I out of time? No, just kidding.
Great job, though.
Oh, thank you.
45 minutes of rapid fire without a net or much of one. What we love to do now is just ask a couple of questions, but beforehand, if you could once again try and wrap up what you've done in a 1 minute or less elevator pitch for our audience, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, totally. And I'll get a little more of the like board game sort of like, how would I pitch this game to my gamer friends because now I know more about the mechanics. All right, so I actually might even have a good title for this game, which is shocking. I'm going to call this Olympic Heartbreak. In Olympic Heartbreak, you are an Olympic athlete who is assigning dice to actions in order to impress your crush and get a date in the Olympic Village. The dice you're assigning are polyhedral dice, so there's big swinginess, and there's lots of room for antics and hilarity to ensue as you and all the other most physically fit and attractive people in the world try and get with each other.
That's great.
Thank you.
All right, so just a couple of questions to wrap up. Did you have fun?
Yes, this was a blast.
How close to your was this easier or harder than you thought it would be?
I don't know what I already told you. I feel like it was harder than I thought it was going to be.
Okay. And which is interesting because it sounds like you've sort of got classroom where you can do this pretty frequently, but I guess you have the
Yeah,
students.
but I make my students do this.
Yeah.
I don't do it. They do. And now I understand why they hate when I have them do it, even though it's fun. I like walk around the room being like, how's it going? And they're like, leave me alone. I'm not done yet. And now I fully understand why they feel that way.
It is so tense. But so how close to your normal process was it?
Oh, I mean, as I said in the middle, very, very far away. I work a lot slower than this. I'm a parent. I have 2 small children, and I have a day job that is game related, but is not designing board games. So I squeeze in time here and there. As I said, I sort of write part of a rule, then I walk away from it, and then I fill it in. So it would be impossible to do my regular process on a podcast because it would take like a month to get to like prototype.
I gotcha. Well, it's interesting because you seem so structured. I think that's partly because you were taking advantage of what you teach your students, but you feel like
I do have a bit of a leg up there in that I tell my students I teach them how to do stuff like this all the time, so I do have some structures and skills to draw on.
Yeah, so my question was going to be, do you feel like that gave you a leg up?
Apparently, for sure, yeah. And I'm happy. Initially I was like, oh, I shouldn't do any of my classroom exercises because that's cheating, but like I do want people to see them in action and understand that like I'm not special, right? Like anyone can do that. You can do the verb exercise. You can do the in this game you are exercise. We do another one, not game related. That's just like to get the creative juices flowing, called 50 uses for a pizza box. It's like a common one from creativity books or whatever, but you put an amount of time on the clock. The like hard mode is 30 seconds. The easy mode is 3 minutes. And you have to think of 50 different things to do with a pizza box. And then you have the different groups go around and cross off where they overlapped. And whoever has the most remaining wins.
Wow.
That's a great one to just like get your brain going.
Yeah. Well, I think your use of those on the show was fantastic. I think people.
Oh, thank you.
People need to hear about the techniques that help you be structured especially about the beginning of the process.
You start and you have an idea of like, okay, I want to make a game about, right, which you all sort of simulate here. Like if I love the Olympics and I love polyhedral dice, I'd be like, all right, here I go. And I think it's easy for board game designers and people who play a lot of board games to get down the mechanical rabbit hole too quick. And so I hope that, like just saying words about the thing, saying verbs, saying ideas, like I always try and resist the urge to go there too soon, because the constraints and the sort of conventions of our hobby and our industry are fine and are good. But like if you can get around them and do something new and different, your game's going to stand out more.
Do you think you're going to continue with this design? Put it on the back burner, or?
Oh, it's definitely going on the back burner. Everything goes in the soup pot. Everything goes on the back burner, at least for a little bit. We'll see. I have other projects I'm working on now, but this. When you first said Olympics and polyhedral dice, and I know this question's coming because I listened to your show, I was like, oh, I'm not going to continue with this game. But I've talked myself in. I like my thematic idea enough that I might.
I think it might be a lot of fun if you get all that stuff ironed out.
Oh, for sure, and it'll be so much fun to talk about, right? Like that's the thing I like of when this is not my only heuristic or criteria in making a game, but it's like if the game is fun to talk about, then that's a good sign that it will keep getting worked on, because I'll keep talking about it, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, I got to put some more time in on that game because I get to talk to someone about Olympians dating, and that's funny.
Thanks, Greg.
Of course.
Thanks for participating with this little exercise. So before we wrap up here, do you have anything that you're working on right now or something coming up that you're excited about that you could share with us?
Yeah, totally. So I have in my upcoming pipeline, I have a game that's been signed to Central Michigan University Press. It's a storytelling game. It's like a light RPG, but it's for board gamers. It uses board game components about a religion in transition over 500 years. So that game's going to be coming to crowdfunding. I'm not sure what platform in September. Check that out. It's that's the game I mentioned that was like on the back burner forever, and I just kept pulling it out and playtesting it until I was like, I have to pitch this because it's done. That's called Keep the Faith with Central Michigan University Press. And then I'm also working with Jason Perez, Shelf Stories, one-stop co-op shop, Puerto Rico, 1897, just incredible guy. We're working on a co-op game about the people's history of the United States that's signed to the Tessa Collective. We don't have a release date yet, but we're getting there. We're locking in on that one, and that one's going to come out hopefully soon.
Awesome.
Wow. I got a question real fast, because you named two what I would consider off-brand board game publishing outlets. Could you just take 1 minute maybe and share how you came to pitch something to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the short answer is I make weird games, and so I need weird people to publish them. Weird. I only use weird in a complimentary sense, by the way. No shade to Tesla Collective and Central Michigan University Press. The longer story is this religion game I had been working on and just kept bringing out and fiddling with. And I showed it to Liz Davidson of Beyond Solitaire because she has a PhD in early Christianity. And I was like, if someone needs to see this game, it's her. And she's connected with the Central Michigan folks because of her podcast and her other work. And so she was like, you should show it to them. I was like, I'm not an academic expert on religion. I shouldn't show it to them. She's like, no, they'll like it. And she was absolutely right. All love to Liz Davidson on that one. And the Tessa game came out of the block by block connection, right? Games with a leftist social perspective is kind of Tessa's bread and butter. You know, that's what they do. And so when the People's History connection came up, Brian from Tessa Collective talked to me and Jason, and we went for it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
Earlier you said that you usually go to PAX Unplugged. We know that's coming up in a couple months. Is there, and people could hang out with you there. I know I see you at the Unplugged room and stuff there a lot. Do you have any online presence that people could connect with you there? Do you have any?
For sure. I have a website for my academic and game design work. It's just my name, G. Loring-Albright. So the letter G, loringalbright.com. And then I'm also on Blue Sky. Greg is on the go. It's Greg with one G at the end, not with two. Greg is on the go at Blue Sky .social, whatever the default one is. I never figured out all that fancy stuff. But that's where you can find me and talk to me online. I love talking about game design stuff. So please hit me up.
Great. Okay. This has been a really fun episode. Hey, listeners, if you want to join in on the discussion about this episode, this season, or if you'd like to participate in a future season, reach out to us online at Total Design Live, either on Twitter or Blue Sky. That's it for this episode, but we hope you'll join us again soon for more Game Design Without a Net. Until next time, I'm David.
And I'm Rosco. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Total Design Live. Be sure to check out how other designers did this season with the same surprise design constraints. We hope this podcast will help inspire you in your own board game design journey and give you a peek behind the curtain about how other designers' creative process works. Please like and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We hope you'll come back and join us again for future episodes.